welcome to everybody here in the hall, in the Voter Garden, and also to people watching on YouTube tonight. We've got the second of our season of talks, and it's fantastic that so many people have come out to join us in the hall. And we hope that you in the hall and people watching at home will really enjoy this evening's offering from Simon. Simon Steer has been a member of the Cairngorm Mountain Rescue Team, and I asked him how long for, and he was scratching his head and umming and ahhing, and the closest we could come is that it's well over 25 years. He's been spending a lot of his spare time up in the mountains doing good things. He's been deputy leader for a long period during that time, but because his day job is with the NHS in Highland, and they've had a little distraction over the last couple of years, he's actually stepped aside from that at the moment, but he's still a very active member of the Mountain Rescue Team. And they are the fourth emergency service for us in this area here, and we are very grateful to know that they are there in the background. We hope never to have to call on them, not least because of the embarrassment that will then live with you for the rest of your life. But it's great to know that they are there. So, format for this evening, as usual, Simon will give his presentation and talk around the work of the rescue team, and then we'll have a Q&A session afterwards. So without further ado, hand over to Simon Steer to take us through this evening. Thanks, Simon.
Hello. I'm going to go through, I hope it's all right with you, what I'm going to do is just go through a little bit about how rescues work and such things, a little bit about the team, go into a little bit of detail about a couple of rescues to give you a kind of feel for what it's about, and then I can take questions after. I've got a tendency to mumble due to an innate lack of confidence, so if you can't hear me, just say, and I'll try and speak up a bit. Can everyone hear? This is like coming to a bank robbers congress, you know that? It's absolutely great. I haven't got a mask on. I'm not ashamed of who I am. I can see the rest of you are. Okay, so Cairngorm Mountain Rescue Team, there are a number of things to know about Cairngorm Mountain Rescue Team. It started the same year I was born in 1963, and it's been kind of a mainstay of rescue responses in this area since then. And it's come to a bit of prominence as a team over the last few years, not necessarily entirely unlinked to what's going on down in Glasgow at the moment, because the whole thing about the Arctic wilderness of the Cairngorms, etc., became much more prominent as people started thinking about global warming and climate change. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we became quite popular with the kind of film industry and, you know, kind of that sort of thing. That's why we ended up on the telly a bit more than some others. That's a picture of me. I used to have a slightly longer beard. It was just so that you can check you've got the right person. So I wanted to start with the first question, which everyone wants to know. So how do I book my rescue? And in due course, we will probably end up with either some sort of dialing tone thing or automated response or whatever. But at the moment, what you do is you phone 999, and then contrary to popular belief, if you've got a broken leg, you don't ask for an ambulance. You ask for police, and then you ask for mountain rescue. If you ask for an ambulance, there's a danger that they actually send one. And ambulances are great, and ambulance crews are absolutely great, but they can't always get to some of the places where you've decided to hurt yourself. So what happens is you end up with an emergency service, and what will then happen is there will be a kind of sieving process that takes place. So first thing to remember about mountain rescue is we're not all sitting there. Well, there are some very sad people who are sitting there waiting to be called out, but most of us have actually got jobs, or alternatively, when this often happens, are doing a thing called sleeping. So you don't necessarily get a totally immediate response. So you can't view mountain rescue like in the same way that you might view say a fire service or an ambulance service. There's not a response time, anything like that. So first thing we have to do is to find out what it is that we're being called out for, and then we have to get the team together, and then we have to get the team to the place. And I'll go into a little bit of detail about how we do that. The main thing to understand is that although we are a voluntary organisation, there is a degree of control. And control in mountain rescue means the centre of the rescue from which all of the decisions and all of the activity is being directed. That's a picture of Ian Cornfoot. who's the head of the ski patrol. Some of you might know him from up the hill, but he's also the team leader now. Probably one of the most knowledgeable people I know in terms of rescue-related stuff, and a tremendous leader, I think, for the team. So Ian, in this instance, is actually coordinating a rescue from the ski patrol office. And you can tell that he's doing that because he's got that kind of wistful 1,000-yard stare that you're meant to have when you're completely calm and relaxed about the fact the guys on the hill will be doing the right thing, which also shows that he's a naive optimist. The team itself consists of about 40 people. Usually we have about 40 people. We try not to get much above that because then the team gets too big and everybody thinks that somebody else will turn out. And if you get much smaller than that, it gets tricky. And you can see why in this little picture, because that's a bunch of people hauling a stretcher. This shot was actually taken in October, when there was a chap hurt himself at the back of Ben McDooey. And it's worth bearing in mind that a Machinist Stretcher, which is the kind of mainstay of what we do, requires you to have somebody on the front, at least one on the front, usually two. You need to have three down each side, and you need to have one or two at the back. So that's you kind of using up several people. You then need somebody who's breaking trail and kind of spotting the way out. All of a sudden, you're starting to get into quite large numbers if you actually want to get a break. So anything that becomes a biggish carry, you need to have around 25 plus people turning up for a rescue to get you out of that, and to be able to keep the pace on it. So that's why we work on the basis of about 40, because you're never going to get everyone on a given night. A little bit more about what is the team. So the team that we kind of work with includes the ski patrol. However, as you can see, some of their casualty handling can be iffy. But and now there's a very strong overlap. There's quite a few of us are both members of the ski patrol and also members of the team. And the useful thing about the ski patrol is you can be in a situation where there's a call out in the corries. And with good snow cover, you can actually be in the corries. I've seen us do it in 20 minutes, from getting the first call to actually getting oxygen to somebody with a head injury, say. So it can happen very rapidly if you happen to be there. So the guys on the hill, including also other people who are in the team, such as fitters and other folk, are actually well able to respond really quite quickly. And the other thing I would say, and I'll come back to this maybe, is there's a lot about local knowledge here. There's a lot about knowing what the conditions are like, knowing where the ribbons of snow are that you can sledge down, etc. The one that everyone knows is the kind of red and white taxi, and this is a good shot for me anyway of the kind of speed with which things can happen. So this rescue took place on the kind of Mesa Pottage area where somebody had taken a fall and broken some bits. And the interesting thing for me about it was that everyone that attended that rescue happened to be in the location or around it. And we ended up with a party on the top of the crag, party at the bottom of the crag, helicopter, etc. Everyone was actually there. The whole thing was done and dusted within probably about 3/4 of an hour, maybe an hour. And the casualty, as you can see, was winched off and had an exciting little trip out for a bit. And the other bit of the extended team that I would want to reflect on is all the keepers and local folk who also help us. So that you'll quite often see on the telly, they're saying, you know, the mountain rescue team was out. What they won't necessarily say is there were a couple of keepers in all-terrain vehicles who really know the territory and probably have got more chance of getting out and getting back without getting something stuck than we have. You know, there's got to be a lot of respect for people who know their patch. And the Gorms is a really massive area. And quite often when you're undertaking searches, you are really using local knowledge from local people who really do know their backyard. In terms of training, the team to me is an interesting one. It's a little bit unusual in some ways. What we don't do is take people, as some teams do, and say, would you like to join a mountain rescue team? And then spend quite a long time turning them into kind of mountain rescue people and teaching them to read maps and things like that. What happens is that people join as experienced and established mountaineers, or ski tourers or hill walkers or whatever. But basically they need to be able to go out onto the plateau at night. And the deal with it is that you need to be able to go out on the plateau at night in bad weather, ideally to come back, and if we're really lucky, to bring somebody back with you. So, you know, it's quite a big ask if you think about it. And so there's a lot about recommendation and people knowing folk. And what we can't offer is the kind of training that some teams offer, where you can take this on as something that will allow you to become a mountain rescuer per se. We usually take seasoned, experienced people and then teach them another bit of the trade. And I can say safely from my own experience, I was a reasonably, I don't look like it now, but I was a reasonably experienced climber. And actually this is a completely different gig. What you're doing in mountain rescue, it is not about plugging your way up an icefall and being heroic and sort of spinning screws and things. It's actually learning about a totally different set of rope tricks that you do, usually which are about going down more than going up, and usually which are more about sort of double and triple safety approaches to try and make sure that if you've got somebody else's kind of welfare under your control, that you don't cock it up. So that's the kind of deal with it. So it's a very different kind of experience. And a lot of the stuff that we do actually is about doing quite mundane things really right. So searching large areas of fairly boring ground, but doing it so you only have to do it once. We do the kind of rope trick stuff, and I'll come on to a bit more about that. And a lot of this is about just, if I just use this picture as an example. So when you're working with kind of mountain rescue stuff, if you're dealing with casualties, you can't use first aid in quite the same way that you would normally. So we do a lot of first aid training. People are qualified to a pretty high level. You can reasonably expect to have to deal with various forms of trauma, multi-trauma, certainly a good chance of getting broken bits, and you may also be in a position where you have to deal with dead people, and you know that's got its own challenges. But the key thing is about, if you've got somebody who's been hurt once and you're trying to avoid hurting them again, we find that leads to greater levels of satisfaction. So when it comes to things like, if you think about that, the way that stretcher is, the first thing you've got to learn is that you dig a ledge before you start putting people on stretchers, because that saves the embarrassment of person stretcher and all the gear flying off down the hill. So you know, you've got to get into that kind of mindset about trying to stabilize somebody in a very unstable place, and make sure that you don't drop anything and you don't drop anyone else at the same time. So first aid stuff can be fairly full on, and it's also often in bad weather, not like in this picture. Probably one of the more dangerous things we do is vehicles. I always say that, well, actually, I would argue that probably the most dangerous time in a rescue is actually going to the base, because there's a tendency to see people getting the blood up and, you know, trying to get there quickly. And I call it rescue rage, but there's a kind of tendency that folk are really trying to sort of hammer down the A9, overtaking people and things like that. And A, you have no rights to do that, and B, it's not very sensible if you actually want to get to the rescue in one piece. So there's a bit about that. And then the next bit is that you have to deal with the vehicles that we use. So mainstay for us is the trusty Land Rover. You can see we've gone for a very kind of metrosexual kind of colour scheme on ours. We don't go for lots of crosses or pointy mountains, and we just decided to do something a bit different. The vehicles themselves, you've got to know what you're doing with them. A number of people at various times have embarrassed themselves. I have to pay homage here to Northern Constabulary, who at this precise point on Christmas Day a number of years back managed to sink their own Land Rover. So this is the paddock area just up by Ben Alder, and it's a very easy place to get yourself stuck or to drain a vehicle. So it all seems like kind of good fun going off doing all these things, but the danger is that if you get a vehicle stuck on a bad night, it's not just embarrassing, it can kind of mess up a rescue a little bit. The horse in the background, by the way, isn't one of ours. We don't keep horses as a backup, just to be clear. The other thing we have to do a lot of training with is the helicopters. We have to do quite a bit of, we have to keep ourselves up to date on the kind of cab level of training so that you can get in and out of the aircraft. And then we work with the aircraft. And what you're seeing here, it doesn't look very interesting, particularly this is the old Sea King, but the deal is this was using a line that you can just see attached to the winchman, and that's quite an important thing. The helicopter, particularly a new helicopter, can start the winchman spinning, which is unpleasant for them and a little bit dangerous. So what we do is we keep a thing called a high line on them, and learning to use a high line is quite important because you've got to make sure you don't tether an aircraft to the ground. That can end very badly. So your tendency is to try and work well with these things. So you don't want stuff like rucksacks or ropes or stuff like that flying around. You've got to just be quite careful. In the picture, those props you can see are stationary, but for those of you not experienced with helicopters, when these things are flying, they go around very quick, and you don't want to get in the way of them. We also have other toys. As you can see, the important thing when driving a Land Rover for mountain rescue is to find a large puddle. And there's probably actually a metalled road about 2 meters to the side of that, but you've got to go through the puddle because it looks good. Yeah, so we've got these, we've got the Land Rovers, and like I say, I mean, the trick is to learn to drive them safely. The danger is if you're being a bit yee-haw with them, you've often got a number of people in the vehicle with you, so you've got to be sensible. The next thing is, and I should have said this earlier, you have to learn how to wear shades in any circumstances. You'll see here Ian is in the shade, but is still wearing shades. That's what we call a very good mountain rescue person. You can also see he's wearing his beard. I should have mentioned that earlier. Beards and tartan shirts are issued to men and women when they join mountain rescue. And most of the women continue with them, actually. So that's a quite neat wee shot there. That's well, I think it is. That was from a rescue where a chap fell the length of the corrie. And see the wee orange thing that's in there? That's the long line that I was telling you about. So what's happened here is we ripped in, Ian took the skidoo in, some of the skied in, managed to get to this chap, get oxygen to him, etc. A helicopter came in. As you can see, it was a nice day. But we actually had provided our first response to him by the time the helicopter actually got in. So the nice thing about that was he got as immediate service as you possibly could. And then afterwards, we were able to work with the helicopter because it's easier for the helicopter if they've got people on the ground. But it does help if the people on the ground know what they're doing as well. So that's a bit about that high line that I was saying to you about. And then they drop the high line, by the way. And if you're really unlucky, it's got sandbags with it. And I think the last one I had to get out of Loch Ann. And you always get this quote, can you just nip down and get the high line for them? It's a bit unhelpful. The other thing we've started using more is these Can-Ams, which are an amazing vehicle. We put wheels on them in the summer, and in the winter we drive them with these tracks. And this was us testing them out by taking them down to the West Wall. And if you've ever tried to take a vehicle, well, hopefully you haven't tried to take a vehicle down to the West Wall, because it could end up really badly if your Ford Focus was heading down that way. But the deal with it is that the getting a vehicle down there requires quite a bit of local knowledge, as in knowing which snow fence you're not next to, not just knowing whether you're in the right corrie, and knowing the points where, in the case of the West Wall, you've actually got to just let the thing glide, and then where you can pull it back out of that and stuff. So it's a little bit hairy, and it does require quite a bit of skill, which is why the guys who work the hill are usually the best people to be driving these things for that. And then there's another wee shot just of the sledge going back out, actually, from a rescue in the quarry again, where we'd managed to get stuff in to help sort someone, then he was choppered out. The key thing with all of these things is you want to get somebody to definitive care as quickly as you possibly can. That's the deal with it. So if we kind of cover, though, that's kind of all the fun bits. The reality is most of the time we're walking, and this is a shot taken as we were walking out. It looks quite nice, but actually the weather was pretty brutal. It was squalls, and this was us searching for a downed aircraft. Now, I'll come back to a wee bit about aircraft in a second. And normally it's more like that. So kind of the blackness is night and the whiteness is snow, and you usually get a combo of the two, which equates to miserable. And again, just worth bearing in mind, there are all sorts of little things you discover when you do this. A lot of the new head torches are great for those of us who remember the old days of box batteries and stuff like that. Except they're so good now they flare back at you, and so there's a lot of tricks to operating at night, and that's where we have to do quite a bit of our stuff, if you like. And the biggie, as I was saying to you, the Machinist Stretcher. So invented by Hamish Machinist. You'll see them dotted around in various pubs, particularly down in Glencoe and Loch Harbour. They've left some of their old ones in pubs. Started off with a kind of cargo net affair on the back of them, then upgraded to an aluminium base on them. But effectively, Scotland loves its Machinist Stretcher, and the reasons are really simple. The stretcher, as you can see, has got quite thick skids, and we get more snow than they get in England. So they use a thing called the Bell Stretcher, which they like more. And so obviously we couldn't like the same thing as them, because and also it's called Bell, which doesn't sound like Machinist, which sounds much more Scottish. So we had to stick with this. And the wider skids mean that you can sledge people, and that's really important. That bit I was saying to you about an actual carry. Remember, the other thing about that is if you've got 3 people on each side and you've got, let's say, 2 at the front and 2 at the back, there's not an awful lot of space if you think about that crowded round somebody. And if you then think about something like the Snechta path, well, it's designed for 1 person or 1.5 people to kind of walk on it. So the problem is then you're off to the sides, because you tend to keep the stretcher on the main bit of the path, which means you're all falling over each other. And so the more you can sledge, the better, because carrying is just brutal. The chances of you hurting yourself are actually relatively high, and most of it, it's just things like shins and things like that. I mean, the best thing to do is to try and stay away from the stretcher. Make sure that the young fit guys carry the stretcher, and then just as you get to the car park, dive on the front so you're there for the photo shot, as I showed you earlier. Those of us that have been in the team for a while are good at it. The other thing with the stretcher that is amazing when you think about it as a piece of design, it splits into 2 halves, so you can carry it. And so in the summer, obviously when there's less snow, you can carry this thing in. It can be pretty brutal again, because in high winds, it's basically a bit like carrying a kind of hang glider on your back, and it can throw you around a lot. But generally speaking, it's relatively good for getting it in. And once it's put together, you can use this as a technical stretcher. So I'll show you some pictures in a wee bit of technical kind of hairy stuff. And it's all the same stretcher. And if you think about that, what a design achievement, that's absolutely amazing. By a guy who basically was, he was an engineer by background, but strictly speaking, he was bodging in his workshop when he started to put this thing together. So an amazing piece of mountain rescue history for me, the Machinist. That's kind of more like what you tend to see a Machinist looking like on a rescue. And you can see there's a little bit of pen on that says rescue box, and that's what's in the rescue box. That's what's in the rescue box if some neep hasn't gone in, opened it and thrown everything everywhere, which is one of the more recent things we've seen happening. It's a bit of a shame. There's a bit of a change to some of the people that are toddling into the quarries, and so we keep one of these in Corrie and Trecht. And the deal is you're not meant to pull it out and decide to do your own rescue. for several reasons. One, you may not know what you're doing, you might hurt yourself. It's better to wait for people who officially don't know what they're doing, which is us. And the second thing is you're not getting insured or anything. And also we might have something more serious than what you've got that we might need it for. So that's kind of the kind of story, really, if you like, of what the team's like, and what stuff we have. We've got all kinds of other stuff that I can cover into for you. We do a lot of stuff with things like vacuum mattresses and vacuum sweats and all those kind of things. And I would argue we provide some pretty good quality care to people when they're in a pretty unfriendly place. But I suppose for me, the question more for this might be kind of what sort of rescues do we do? So I thought I would go through, if that's okay with you, a few rescues and the types of rescues. So the first type of rescue, the most common type of rescue that we get, we are a team that, so like mountain rescue teams reflect their communities. So our community tends to be a hill community, so our rescues tend to be more in mountains, and they tend to involve people who are lost. And you can see here a classic situation where we've got, there's a couple of key things about this. Firstly, the figure in the foreground you can see is carrying a very, very big rucksack. That rucksack actually contains a vacuum mattress. It weighs absolutely nothing. So this is clearly a very experienced member of the team who's picked up a very big, heroic-looking rucksack that weighs absolutely nothing. Less experienced members of the team end up with small rucksacks carrying large ropes and things like that. The next thing you'll see is you can see that the then team leader, Willie, on the right, wearing the red hat, he believes it's so that we know he's the team leader. The truth is it's so we know to keep away from him. And Willie is pointing in the opposite direction to everybody else, and that's what you call leadership. So, and I think the final thing that you can pick up from this is there's obviously a state of confusion. So, so the trick for mountain rescue is always to be just slightly less lost than the people that you're looking for, and also to get back, preferably before them if you can. The other thing that we end up doing, so that's a kind of the lost people. I'll go back to a kind of wee bit about how we deal with lost people. We also have to do quite a bit to do with our local kind of snowscapes. Contrary to popular belief, you don't get a lot of harum-scarum climbery accidents. Climbers in the main tend to be pretty good at getting themselves off, and they tend to have a level of technical skill and experience a lot of the time that they know that being halfway up a face is not a good place to be. And, you know, if you've got ropes and all that stuff and you've actually got up there, there's a very good chance you're sitting on a half-decent belay. There's a very good chance you can get back down. So most of the time, contrary to what people might think, our rescues are actually tied up with people who've just got to the base of the crags and now can't go further. But in fairness to climbers, a lot of the time they'll have got themselves off, or they're good climbers, but they're not good navigators, and they've got to the top and then promptly get themselves lost, and or get themselves into trouble because often the crags are a little bit sheltered, and when you get to the top, it's a bit of a maelstrom. So, so don't think it's all about kind of people hanging on by the fingertips. That's less common. Although we do get and have had some lovely examples of people doing this. So soloing and then getting themselves stuck. A solo climber who's stuck doesn't have ropes usually and doesn't have gear, and they usually have quite a few troubles at that point, and find themselves in a position where it's quite hard to get them off because you've got to get to them with technical gear somewhere in the middle of a crag sometimes, or quite often it's right near the top of a crag. So this is the kind of, the other thing worth knowing is that for us, we need to know our way around these kind of these crags. I remember a number of years back with a local guy called Jazz Hepburn, the pair of us, I'd like to say scampering, but I was crying a lot around the top of Hell's Lum, and it required quite a bit of climbing knowledge to know exactly where we were to try and find the people we were looking for, because it was in the dark. And it's an uncomfortable feeling when you're moving at speed, kind of going up and down the top bits of crags, knowing that below you there's a sort of bum slide into oblivion that you really don't want to kind of partake in. So I think the key with this is the guys that are in the team, they know their crags and they know their hills, and that's really, really important. You also know when not to be on them. So this is a great shot of Ian soloing on Fearco Ridge with me when I'd said to him, wouldn't it be great to go and have a nice autumnal day? And in my head, it was going to be kind of like blue sky and really nice. And then we got hit by a blizzard and ended up doing a kind of winter ascent of this. So it was quite useful that we knew where we were going. So this point that Ian's on Fearco Ridge is a common place for people to get themselves into a bit of bother, because up until then it's been relatively non-technical, but there's a couple of points where it steepens up and you can have a nasty tumble if you don't get it right. So another wee thing just kind of about the crags, and I'll come back to this, is just bearing in mind where the crags are. So as I was saying to you, there's a bit about having to rescue people off crags, not quite so common as you might think. There's a bit about having to rescue people from the bottom of the crags if they've been hurt, quite common. There's a bit about having to find people who've got to the top of the crag and then gone the wrong way coming off. And then there's another wee bit, which is people who get into trouble on descents. And that's not just the getting lost. That's where we get into areas like Avalanche or heading down the wrong steep area and such things. But just so you know, we do occasionally do kind of big steepy stuff. And a couple of years back, we had a remarkable wee period where we did, I think it was 4 mid-crag, big crag rescues in a week. And it was the way it went. And normally we don't do an awful lot of them. But at that point we had, I think it was 2 in Cairngorm, 1 on the Larrick Crags. And then the big number was doing one off of the Short Stone Crag. And what you can see there is basically a massive lower. That's a lower the full length of the Shilter Stone Crag. And as I was saying to you before, that's your lovely Machinist Stretcher that's kind of in the middle of that. And you can see there what you've got is a couple of barrow boys taking the stretcher down. So when you're doing what this is called a horizontal lower, that's where you take the stretcher down like a ledge and you have a couple of people on either side and they guide it down. And also if you've got someone who's in a bit of kind of trouble, that you may well also be stopping to try and do things to stabilize them. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's not an awful lot you can do when you're dangling like that, but you know, you do end up having to do some things sometimes. The other ways that you get people off of these kind of big steeps are a vertical lower, which is where you send the stretcher down long ways, and usually the barrow boy is at the bottom of that. And we've got techniques we use for jugging up and down to get yourself into position. The thing to bear in mind is that you've got a lot of rope there, so you can knock a lot of stuff off, which is not good. And the other issue you've got is it's remarkable how sticky aluminium gets when you're trying to get it over ledges and over lumps and stuff. So there's a lot of heaving and hauling, and really experienced people make a point of usually catching a thumb in the midst of that between the stretcher and a rock or something. So you do get a couple of knocks when you're doing this kind of big lower, and you know that's the way some of these things are. You know, you've got to do it. That's another shot looking down at the 2 barrow boys going down. And you can see as well how the rope is hanging quite free there. But the good news is for the person that's in there, it's a relatively stable ride down. It's just the rest of us that are bricking it a wee bit. And I think the other thing I would say there is when you start thinking about some of the loads here, that's why I was saying to you about it being different from climbing. Normally when you're climbing, you're thinking about how you look after each other. When you're doing this, you're starting to think about the kind of load you've got with like 3 people on the end of a bit of string here. And it really does start to get a little bit technical. That's why we've got so many fail safes. The other reason we have to be quite clever in our training about this is if you end up having to pass knots and such things, you've got to make sure you don't end up with that weight jammed below you and no way of getting it further down. So it's not just embarrassing, it could be really bad for someone if you end up with a stretcher stuck, you know. So you've got to get it right when you do it, which is one of the reasons why we train quite a bit on this stuff and then hope we don't have to use it. The other thing we've been seeing quite a bit more of is the kind of ski touring type things. There was that picture of me looking like Santa was taken after we had to go after a split boarder who had gone off down towards Strathnethy and then just didn't know really how to get back out. And to be honest, I put this picture in because this is taken in the finest ski area in Scotland, which is Tomatin, in case anyone's wondering. And like last winter, you know, some amazing blue sky skiing to be had, and it was really nice. The problem, though, is that you see all these pictures of the blue sky stuff. My view, and it's a personal view, it's not a team view, is that there's no such thing as side country in Scotland. The idea that you can just nip slightly off from the piste and then just drop back into the piste is kind of a bit flawed, because you nip slightly off the piste. I mean, quite often you'd be as well carrying a map and compass when you're on the piste. So actually, the idea that you can just nip off makes it a bit tricky. And so, you know, that was a good example of a chap who had all of the gear. And there's a lot of myths about people kind of always being out poorly equipped. This fella had loads of good stuff, but he just, when he was stuck with this idea that he's in a blizzard, his dog wasn't happy, he wasn't happy, and he was trying to find his way back out. He had GPS with him, he had all of the weather forecasts, etc., etc. He just became overloaded, and I kind of feel for the guy, because it's very easy for folk to start getting judgmental and say somebody shouldn't have been out in this or that, but you don't really know about a Cairngorm blizzard until it's given you a good spanking, and then after that you treat it with a bit of respect. But the first one that hits you is a little bit of a kind of mind-blowing experience. So, and for this chap it was. I have to say it was also for us a bit mind-blowing, because it was pretty hairy getting down to him, and he'd managed to find the point of greatest stress on the slope to actually be sitting on. So, and myself and Ian were very worried as we got towards him. And the other thing we get, another wee development, this is taken on the finest mountain biking trails, by the way, in the area, which is at Tomatin. And but this is Big Al Gilmore on his e-bike. I don't know if any of you know Al, but he's a tremendous mountain biker. And e-bikes are a fascinating thing, because what they're doing is they're allowing people to switch on the turbo and get up to places. And there's so many things online. There's so many good trails online, and there's so many joke trails online. People are getting sent into some crazy spots. And of course, once your turbo runs out, you're left with a really heavy thing with a battery and you. And so we have seen an increase in the number of mountain bike related incidents. And the other thing, of course, is a bit like with skiing, it's a velocity sport. So if you do pan it, then you're liable to give the guys a great opportunity to test out those vacuum splints and things that I was describing, because there's a good chance you'll get multi-trauma. But nowadays, there's a good chance we're going to see people further and further back, because things like McDooey, etc., are becoming pretty standard trails for people to do. Certainly Cairngorm Moor, etc. I've met people up there in a blizzard on a bike. I have to be honest, I was on a bike as well, so I'm not criticising them, but not everyone's kind of able to nav on that stuff. A bit like skiing as well, naving on bikes can be tricky. Fun?
Go lighter again.
Oh, sorry, was a muttering. Sorry, it's I'm getting tired. It's nap time. Okay, right. So what I'll do now is I'll speak up, which will hopefully help things. I just sort of tell you a little bit about what search is, because I'm hoping this will be interesting, because most of the time people don't tell you what it is we actually do when we're looking for folk. Now, this is not your opportunity to say, haha, I know what they'll do to try and find me, so I'm going to do something like this to avoid them getting me. So essentially, you know how you sometimes see stuff on the telly about the kind of behaviour modelling and things like that happens? There's a big chunk of what we do in mountain rescue that is about that kind of stuff, trying to work out what the lost person behaviours are likely to be. So this is a real example. So there's a chap. So this is how it always starts. It's 3 o'clock on the 24th of January. So you've got approximately 13 minutes of daylight left, and you're told there's an overdue climber, and the car is in the sugar bowl, and the family are concerned because they haven't received a text. Now, that's the first thing, is people now expect to receive texts. Some people expect to receive WhatsApp messages. Some people are actually doing kind of like Insta videos of them going along as they go along, and then it all stops. So the idea that you're permanently in contact seems to have really got with some people, and you end up sort of, well, he got to here, and this is the video he sent us type thing. So anyway, this was somebody who'd been in the hills for a bit. So this is the other thing, is if somebody's been in the hills for a bit and now you're getting worried, when did the bad thing happen, if the bad thing happened? So you don't quite know. And then the other thing that we get told, which is, firstly, most people who get rescued are, quote, very experienced. Now, very experienced can mean different things to different people. Being very experienced in walking in the peak is not going to be the same as being very experienced in walking in the Cairngorms. And that might imply different levels of gear and stuff like that. So that's one thing. The next thing you get is, and it always, I've got to be honest with it, it makes my heart sink, is, and they're training for their winter mountain leader. That means that's somebody doing a whole load of clever nav stuff, which means we've probably got to do a whole load of clever nav stuff to find them, because they may not be in the kind of obvious places you would expect them to be, because they're doing clever nav stuff. So you see what I mean? Already, just from that you know there, you're starting to get some information. This is also very typical, is that you end up with winds in excess. So by the time you get told about this, the winds are now up to over 100 miles an hour, and there's a really nasty blizzard. And then if you've got these really strong winds, the thing you've always got to watch out for is avalanches, and we'll come back to avalanches. But the avalanche risk can be really nasty, and it can be really nasty either by being localized, so there are particular places that you don't want to be. That's usually where you've got to go and look for the person. Or alternatively, it could be that you're getting weird conditions that you're not expecting to get localized stuff. So there's a lot about avalanche prediction that goes in. Digger and the guys doing the avalanche service give you some really great information, but you've also got to keep your wits about you. And it's quite important when you're starting to piece something like this together to realise that the first problem you've got with everything I've described there is you're going to have to look out for your own people, aren't you? Because they're going to be heading into something that potentially could be quite nasty. So the known route of this person is, and all of this was reported, by the way, on the news, so I'm not describing anything that's kind of confidential, was basically going through the Larrick heading up towards Cairngorm. And that's what you've got at the time. So the obvious thing to do is to check that kind of route, isn't it? Except the problem we then get is that we hear that actually some of the texts are saying that the chap had been going off doing his second Munro of the day. Now, if we go back to the kind of known route, there's quite a few Munros in that area. So, and if you're going up that glen, the Larrigrue, you could be going either side to grab some Munros. And if you're doing your winter mountain leader, you could be using all sorts of unusual routes to do it. So that was the first problem we had. So that's looking across to the Corries of Braedeer, which is where we kind of reckoned the chap might be. Unfortunately, the weather was really filthy. Now, this shot wasn't taken on that night, but I put it in because it's one of my favourite rescue experiences, because I got an apology out of an RAF pilot. See the guy in the yellow? See just to the right of him, there's a little, can you see that little reddy, goldy coloured light? That's a helicopter, which is about 2 feet off the ground, and it's crabbing sideways with the winchman hanging out the door. It was one of the best bits of flying I've ever seen. It was a guy called Ratty was flying, and they were crawling out, and I'd just taken that picture, and they said, I can't believe it, they're coming to pick us up. And we all thought this was great, so we stood like lemons, wearing the appropriate lemon-coloured clothing, waiting for this helicopter to get there until we saw the winchman going like this. And then we realised he wasn't stopping, he was actually watching the ground so that he didn't hit it. And he came over us, and if you'd raised your head, you would have got clouted by a wheel. And then he apologised to us afterwards for busing us quite so low. He did 2.5 clicks like that, just going sideways out. Tremendous piece of flying. It was, I think it was the last operation in the Cairngorms by the old Sea King. Amazing piece of work. And it got the guy out, which was really nice. It didn't get us out, which was less nice. So anyway, so a little bit more on the story. So next thing that we've got to take into account is this picture of here of guys digging holes in snow. So that's this was taken during a training exercise, but it's about understanding the snow. So the reason I put this in is so I remember to say to you, the avalanche risk in the northern quarries of Bray Reach was off the scale. So and the snow's blowing around. Remember, we've got this 100-mile-an-hour wind that's going. So everyone, okay, everyone get over it, all right? It's a dog. So what do you notice about the dog? The dog's olfactory senses are of no use to anyone at this point, and that's because the dog is covered in snow and ice. So one of the problems that you can get and with this rescue is we're sending dogs into the quarries, but the dogs aren't going to pick up a lot with all this snow and blow going on. So next thing that you've got to take into account with rescues is it's not clear unless it's clear. So you might have sent a dog in, but if you aren't confident that you've actually covered that area, you're probably going to have to go back and see what you can find out. But bear in mind what I said to you, 100-mile-an-hour wind, dumping snow, etc. Whatever you were in today, tomorrow is going to be very different. Okay. So next thing that we discover, and this was the kind of final tricky bit for us, was the family then told us that the guy had got a snow shovel for Christmas. So remember, we've got it's mountain leader doing his training. So instead of now thinking about using the bothies, etc., we've now got to think of anything that is white and deep enough you might have dug into. So the result of that is massive. And so I've penned out for you a bunch of lines here. The deal with this is when we're searching for somebody, if somebody's lost on Cairngorm, so that kind of brownie coloured bit, that's the kind of area we'll cover. So we'll usually go Cairngorm, drop into Keithsmerritt, go down Rybert, go down Duvan. We'll probably then go down the west bridge of Lockham, which is the opposite direction from the long brown bit, and do the quarries. And you kind of try and do that. And it's called a corridor search because you're covering the main corridors you think people will be in. In this case, because we knew a bit more to the south, what we were doing was trying the areas we thought he might have gone into there. Next problem we have is, well, when we're talking about the number of Munros, is we start then thinking about, well, could it be Benavane? Could it be McDooey? Could it be others, Derry, Cairngorm, etc. So you start having to hunt around more things. And then we also have the obvious bit of Bray Reach and Cairntoul, and then further off the map, you've got other Munros that are sitting there that are classic mountain leader winter navigational challenges. So the point I'm making to you is in this sort of situation, you end up, you're trying to work out what you've got. But if you think about what I said to you before, you've got a team of 40 and you're expecting to get hopefully about 20 odd to 25 maybe people out in that first call out. You're not going to cover all of this in a day. So the ideal is if you can get an aircraft up. But remember what I said to you, it's 100-mile-an-hour winds, etc. You're not going to get an aircraft. So what you have to do is go for hotspots and really hope that you're going to connect with a person. So in this particular instance, it was one of the biggest searches that took place in Scotland. It was superseded by, do you remember the young folks that got lost on the Ben? It was superseded by that. But the numbers, I think, in this are pretty amazing. I mean, 1,500 to 2,000 man-hours or person-hours across 9 teams. Most of it was the Cairngorm team. We kept searching on and off for 4 months, looking for the chap. And you're talking about nearly 400 square kilometres was searched in that time, and searched pretty well. And the key to this was actually that you're dealing with somebody who effectively had gone down near the Falls of Dee, and if you look at the direction of that quarry, it's just going to fill with snow, and that's what happened. And that's why sometimes you end up not finding people. So, because you see a lot about the happy ever after. In fact, we had one quite recently. But actually, sometimes you have to spend a long time and you don't find folk. And eventually we did find this chap. And he was in these quarries here. Okay, so that's a wee bit about how you go looking for people when you're doing a big search. There's a problem that you can get, which is aircraft. And for those of you that hadn't clocked it, aircraft don't follow paths. So therefore, you can't do corridor searches. So this is a picture from the so you're a very young crowd, but some of you may remember that there was a Cessna went into Cairngorm a few years back. And we had, frankly, we had a hell of a job finding it, actually, even though it was in a really obvious place because the weather was pretty filthy. But this is the aircraft going in, and you can see it's got really helpful colours of blue, dark blue and white in a white and black snowscape. So really easy to miss these kind of things. But the main thing with aircraft is you don't know where to start. When you think about, you know, where it's last seen, etc., it's really hard to find them. And they do tend to break up. The main thing with an aircraft is that the big heavy bits go further. So actually what happens is if they hit sideways, then the lights of the engine will move quite fast. This is all around the Marcus Well area. We also have gliders. That's another thing that we end up having to deal with. I've always wondered about this. So this is a glider that went in. What's fascinating though is I've never understood why Hamish in the purple trousers is deciding to do stretching exercises in the corner there. And this is a good example. You see in the foreground there, you can see the wire clippers. So the big issue that we had there was that we arrived, tried to get a casualty out, but actually the casualty was all caught up in the wires that make the glider work. And then finally, I thought I'd say a wee bit about avalanches. So quite a few years back now, we reckoned we'd kind of been getting away with it a bit, that we hadn't had a really big avalanche, and we really did a lot of work to try and improve our skills around it, and the science, and there is a lot of science behind it, of avalanche rescue had been improving significantly. So we were really trying to make sure that what we were doing was as close to best practice as we could get. And it was a good thing because we ended up with several. This is one from 2000, would you believe it? This is probably the best rescue that has ever happened or will ever happen in Scotland, ever. And there's no debate about it. As you can see, firstly, there were a number of people were involved in it. Every single one of them got out okay, so there was nobody really badly hurt. The second thing is you can see that people are wearing shades and it's sunny, so it was a really nice day. The other thing that happened was we had more helicopters than we knew what to do with, so we actually had two Sea Kings cycling going backwards and forwards. We also had the little yellow one from Regmore, but we had to tell it to move because it kept parking in the parking space for the Sea Kings, and they're bigger. And the other thing is you can see there's lots of gear there, and so the RAF rescue weren't available. They were on K2, I think, at the time. So they just delivered loads and loads of stuff. So because we didn't have to carry it up, you can see a foreground there, vacuum mattresses, gases, everything. You couldn't have wanted for more stuff. But that's not why it's the best rescue ever. The reason it's the best rescue ever is because having finished that, it was the end of a thing called the Red Bull Northern Exposure. And there was a party at Glenmore Lodge. So with our shades on and sunburnt after our glorious rescue, we all then arrived down to find hot tubs, a Beach Boys tribute band, an artificial beach, and a free bar. So, and that will never happen again. You can't get the stars to align like that. So, but it's a selfless thing we do in mountain rescue, I need to stress. The other thing about this, this is one of my favourite mountain rescue slides for several reasons. So the person who's back, you can see there hiding his face, is the officer who led the group of troops onto the avalanche slope. And if there was a little bubble there, you would see him thinking, "Where's my career going next?" And in a moment of genius, he managed to capture the key determinant of future career by realizing that there's one thing that we Brits love more than anything else, and that's dogs. And so what he decided to do was to say that the dog had saved them all and had dug them out of the avalanche. And at this point, dog gets a medal, the whole sort of thing. So the result is that everyone then began to praise this amazing dog. Now, I wasn't worried about it because we got our Beach Boys party, etc. But the dog became fated as a rescue dog. So I've always thought that was rather sweet. The other thing I've also wondered is, and I'm still not quite sure, but you can see somebody with a stirrup pump there, and I'm not sure why we were providing colonic irrigation on the hill, but it is a service we can offer if anyone needs it. Okay, but as a kind of bottom line with avalanches is avalanches either are things that people walk away from or they don't, and so this is I've put this slide in because I was quite keen people understand how big avalanches are in Scotland. People tend to think of Scottish avalanches as kind of avalanche light. You know, it's if you want to get properly avalanche, you want to go to the Alps, and I can assure you, you can get properly avalanched here. This was one of the first really known airborne avalanches that happened in Scotland. And these big blocks of ice that you can see here are actually the ice out of Corrylochen. So it's the Lochen at Corrylochen. And what happened was there was an airborne came down the Twin Burns with a couple of lads in it. And the force of the avalanche hitting the Lochen blew the Lochen out of the Lochen. And that's why you've got blocks the size of, sort of like half a mini or a mini maybe. And so there was a massive kind of explosion of ice came out. And then what was then the avalanche then filled the Lochen. So, you know, we're talking vast amounts of snow here. And that one was back, that was 20 plus years ago that took place, that one. But I think the key point we'd want to just make is you do get really, really big, really, really bad avalanches in Scotland. The other thing we get in Scotland is the kind of terrain trap avalanche. So I didn't want to get too technical about avalanches, but I just thought it was worth people understanding a little bit about how avalanches kind of work differently. So that's a calamine, and you can see it's a steep V. Now, if you think about it, if you've got something that's a steep V, or it's got a hole, or it's a burn, or something like that, then what happens is when the snow comes down, it will deposit higher in a narrowing. Yeah, so that's what we call a terrain trap. And so that means you can get remarkable depths out of a relatively small avalanche because it's all being compressed into the one place. And that's what happened here. The other thing that happened here was some remarkable, remember I said to you right at the start about localized snow conditions. So there were some remarkable localized snow conditions. And you can see there the crown wall of the avalanche. You also see there's a rock in there as well, which is a kind of stress point for the avalanche. So the crown wall is the point where if you think of a slope where the slope kind of goes back a little bit, the convexity, that's where you're going to get your stress point. The blanket of snow is kind of creaking and possibly even trying to move down that. So problem with avalanches is they're usually caused by people, and if you kind of step on that, you might be the thing that is just too much for that kind of that bit of insecurity that sits within the slope. And as a result, then you can see that kind of thinnish kind of bit of snow is going to go down into a narrowing, so therefore it will get quite deep. And if that happens, you end up with a really deep, hard effort. So remember what I said to you right at the start about control. And the key thing about mountain rescues, yes, we are volunteers. I'd like to think we're not amateur. And the really big thing is we do what we're told. So it doesn't matter how long you've been in the team. The person who's in control of an avalanche is the person who's in control, and you do what you're told. Because there's no room for freestyling when you're dealing with avalanches, because you're trying to have a really, really organised, very disciplined search. And we use all kinds of things like little flags and stuff like that. But the key with this is you're moving as quickly as you can, as organised as you can, if there's somebody under there. And if there is, you've then got to work out how you're going to look after them. So as you can see, there's sticks and things everywhere. That may look like chaos, but trust me, it was really organised. And this is the slide I wanted to show you about what I was talking about depth. So you can see here that basically the calamine's filled with this kind of big load of snow. And so if you are out skiing and things like that, the bit to watch out for is it's kind of a couple of things happen to you with avalanches. The first one I showed you involving the dog, the stirrup pump, and the sun, and remember the Beach Boys. What you've got there is a classic kind of Scottish avalanche. That's where somebody gets swept. And the problem for them is they hit stuff. And usually the stuff they hit is harder than they are. Although obviously most Scots are pure dead hard. But the thing is they're hitting things and they get bashed up and they get beaten up. And usually they end up on top or only partially buried. So the full burials are really quite unusual. But if you're dealing with full burials, then you've got a limited time that you're operating to. And then there's the final bit. This is my favourite picture of Julia Bradbury. That's her up there. Who, as a TV presenter, goes on the telly wearing a white snowsuit? Seriously, you know. Anyway, the key point here is we do quite a bit with TV folk. It's not actually because we're kind of media junkies. It's a good way for us to make people aware of what we do and what other people in Mountain Rescue do, and it stops us having to do other things to keep our profile up. Because the bottom line is, when you take into account you've got your rescues and you've got your training, etc. It's a bit of a life choice. You know, you lose a lot of time, and your family loses quite a bit of time. My family were very happy to lose a lot of time with me, but for people who are loved, it's different. You know, so anyway, so that's the reason. If you've ever wondered why we're happy to do it, that's why. It's an easy way to try and keep our profile up. So hopefully that's what I was hoping, was that it would give you a bit of a feel for what we do, and maybe a feel that, you know what, it's a great thing to do. It's good fun. It's enjoyable. The people you do it with are absolutely marvellous, and sometimes you manage to pull off something that's truly remarkable, and most of the time you pull off something that is really quite mediocre. It's not that remarkable at all. We spend quite a bit of time going out, walking around, and somebody turns up and such things. But it's a nice thing to do, and it's enjoyable. And I think the key for me is people often ask, you know, why do you do the mountain rescue thing? I think most of us are just of a view, well, somebody would have come for me, so that's why you do it. Kind of still, that all sounds a bit squishy and noble, but actually that's the truth, because that's, to me, the essence of what the Hill community is about. We all look after each other. That's what we do in the Hill, because if we don't, then there's often nobody else there to do it. So thanks for coming here and supporting this and supporting your hall. And I hope that was vaguely interesting to you. Some of you stayed awake. It was great. Cheers.
Thanks so much, Simon. That was really good. Great stuff. And I hope people enjoyed it. I hope you're all able to hear the commentary, because there were some quite good asides that peppered the talk. So thanks very much indeed. Can I just say at this stage as well, before I forget, that there is a collection box here, and it would be could put something in just to support the mountain rescue team, because they do a great service. And although they do get a little bit of government funding now, it is most of the money that they require for all the expensive toys on their own. But so thanks for that, and it would be great if you could do that. And for people who are watching on YouTube, again, it would be good if you could make a donation, and some of that donation we'll pass on to the mountain rescue. Okay, so that was really good, and I'm sure people have got some questions that they would want to ask of Simon and of the team. This is the awkward silence. But
I'd like to ask about preparation. So to what extent would it be preferable for people to prepare better and leave instructions or whatever before they go? How useful is kit? We have a piece of kit, for example, that is registered with the mountain rescue, and if you are in trouble, you just simply press an alarm and it gives a signal to the mountain rescue team. How many people are relying on what 3 words, and how useful is it?
That's 3 questions. Okay, I'll deal with what 3 words has been useful. Although there's some issues at the moment, I think, about what 3 words in which country. So I think, but I think it has proven to be useful for folk. So that's been handy. Personal locator beacons. They've been pretty interesting. I would say there's been a couple of good examples where somebody has set off a personal locator beacon, and it's allowed them to be reached faster and more directly than might have otherwise have happened. And that's actually really been useful for them, because it's meant they've been evacuated to definitive care, and that's usually been around sort of cardiac episodes and things like that, where time's pretty well of the essence. And in fact, bizarrely, because of the nature of my work, I haven't done a lot of rescues recently, but I ended up with one in the winter there, which was all to do with a locator beacon on a watch. And again, the really handy thing with these things is it's really nice to know exactly where you're going. When I started in this game, it used to be that some bedraggled individual would hit the red telephone box at the Cairngorm car park, phone 999 in a state of high anxiety and total misery, and then you'd have to work out what you were dealing with. And whereas now, you might well be getting a precise point, and that's really good. So that works. I have also had my Christmas dinner wrecked by a personal locator beacon, which malfunctioned and set off in Cobra. And the only thing that made me kind of happier about that was that the police actually tried to get there, and that's when they sank their Land Rover. So, but I think things like that, they're a bit of a double-edged sword, because it's a bit like a mobile phone's a good thing or a bad thing. Mobile phones are amazing things. They're not great if you put them in your rucksack and don't listen to them, and you've got a rescue called out on you. They're not great if you didn't keep them warm, or if you were using them for lots of things and then your battery goes down. They've got an issue with jumping. So you do a 999, it goes to one place, but then after that we lose the signal and such things, and we often can't get people back. And not everyone can work out how to get their exact location. So anything that gives us a location, that's heaven, if you know exactly where you're going to, because you've got a hot point that you're heading to, and that's good. There's an interesting thing about people leaving their routes. If somebody's left their route and they've stuck to it, that's great. If somebody's left their route and they've changed their mind, that's a bit of a blow. And there's a bit about, particularly with probably more so with climbers, I would have said, about saying, I'm going off to do this remote route. They get there and it's not in next, so they do something else. And that's a very sensible mountaineering decision. But it does mean if something goes wrong, you're looking in the wrong place. Or they maybe spot something on the way that they didn't realise was going to be in condition. So for me, there's a lot about, people have to make sensible mountaineering decisions. The other thing you see people, the example I gave you of chaps sitting with the weather forecast, the snow and avalanche forecast, the GPS, etc. All the toys sitting there, but just being overcome, not just by the kind of conditions, but also with the amount of information. Because a lot of people, the GPS only tells you where you are, doesn't tell you how to get necessarily, unless you know how to use it, to where you want to be. And so there's quite a few instances. I do remember the first time somebody gave us a shout, and I was speaking to the guy, and the guy said, "We're completely lost. This is my location," and then proceeded to recount a 10-figure grid. And you're like, no, we know exactly where you are. You're not lost. You just don't know how to get found, if you like. So, sorry, that was a ramble. Did that answer you?
Yes. How much would you prefer if people prepared better?
That's,
Is it useful at all?
I think it depends on what's happening with the folk. I think the main thing that you would always ask folk to be able to do is to have thought about what you're going to do if you or the day isn't up to what you plan to do, and make mountaineering decisions. And I think that's if there's a danger at the moment with the kind of internet stuff sometimes, is that people see the blue sky day and decide to do it on a grey sky day, and it may not be the same thing. So I think it's a bit about, in terms of preparation, my big thing would be knowing what you're able to do, knowing what you're able to do on that day, and knowing what the implications of the day are for what you're planning to do. That was an answer that would have done good for Donald Rumsfeld, you know that?
I'd just like to know, in the time you've been there, 25 years or so, things have changed dramatically, as you say, with technology and so forth. And also the volume of people going in. We've all got more leisure time, and there's a greater... I'll just float over. There's a greater variety of things that people do as well now. Has the volume of calls gone up? Are you getting a lot more have they gone up in proportion to the volume of people that are using the mountains? So how many calls do you get in most years?
That's an interesting one. Well, people can come out with all sorts of stuff about statistics, which is interesting. So there would be an argument that says the volume of calls has gone up. We've had a significant number of calls, 30 roughly, since June, which is a lot compressed into a short period. The Cairngorm team would normally get about 60 incidents. Depends on whether or not you get a bad week, where you get 3 or 4 of them in 1 week, how that impacts on you. However, my own take on it has been that actually with the advances, people have been getting themselves off more often, probably. And
you're getting called out earlier probably as well.
Yeah.
Because you're getting called from the hill, so you can get out in daylight rather than in the middle of the night.
Yeah, but then there's that flip side that I said to you, which is somebody sitting at home waiting for a text because they haven't heard a text for the last 20 minutes and they think they should get one. So you get those as well. So despite the increased number of people, I mean, we certainly this summer or this kind of period, well, this has been a period that's been a bit unprecedented, hasn't it? Yeah. So there's been a bit of a difference in the way things have gone out this year. But generally speaking, what we tend to get is we get quite a few smaller things where a small squad of folk will maybe bomb up to, 11:41 and run round to someone and go and get someone and things like that. Or certainly my inclination was always to try and start small and not bring everybody out. And then you would get a larger number, maybe a dozen plus of kind of bigger, full day, maybe through the night, that sort of thing. And then you'll usually get 2 or 3 kind of like what you would view as that year's epic rescues, that were kind of more snowy and blowy, just a bit more arduous, a bit bigger, or involved a bit of kind of hanging on string or something like that.
And what's the balance between summer and winter? I mean, most of your slides were of winter conditions because they're much more photogenic. But do you get more call-outs generally during the summer, or
we used
or is
to
it fairly evenly balanced?
No,
you said 30 this sort of spring, summer, and autumn. That seems quite a lot.
When I started with the team, it was definitely a winter team. Yeah. We did much more in winter. But now I think the profile of the people visiting the area has changed, and so we now get a different sort of call out. So you'll get more mountain biking, you'll get more kind of slightly remote, twisted, broken ankles, those kind of things. And with the rise of internet kind of nice walks to do and stuff like that, people are going to places that they might not have gone to before. So you get more of those in the summer. The winter stuff, again, people have got more navigation aids and things like that. My kind of impression is that there are more people managing to get off and get out in winter. Particularly if you think about things like if ski touring, and if you went for a tour over to McDoey and then you're coming back, and the weather goes bad on you, that can be quite scary. But if you're looking at a wee box that tells you exactly where you are, suddenly that becomes quite comforting. And the fact that you've got that comfort, and then you add into that an ability to maybe navigate a wee bit, it's more that the whole world doesn't descend on you, and you actually find your way out. So it's just changing, and people are better equipped. The gear that you've got is keeping you warmer. You're not getting the stumbles, mumbles, fumbles, grumbles, and any other umbles you can think of. Yeah.
And are people always hugely appreciative when you turn up? And I know the answer to this.
Most people. Well, to be quite honest, most people are really pleased to see you, because they're cold and uncomfortable, and that's nice. Yeah, it's nice to go and see people that are kind of not feeling very happy and make them happy. Spread a bit of love,
Very diplomatic. Peter.
A few years ago, we were involved in trying to get mountain rescue, and that went through 999. and the call centre insisted on us giving a postcode. And this went on for some time.
Yeah.
I mean, the level of knowledge at the call centre level seemed pretty abysmal. I wondered how that reflected on the mountain rescue team. If you get a word that somebody at an unknown postcode reference, but somewhere in the Cairngorm is missing, how do you get the further information?
So that's the kind of, that's a good question actually, because I didn't really cover some of that. So that's the Cluedo bit. So the first thing is I've also been in that situation where I actually had a casualty across my knees and I was on a steep bit of ice and I was phoning a 999 saying, can I get a helicopter? And they insisted that I give them a postcode. And unfortunately, I don't think the helicopter had street maps. So the problem with it is every rescue starts with partial information or wrong information. It's like when somebody said to me one day, I'm on the R of Cairngorm, and I had to say there are 2. And there's at least 4 on that map that you're looking at because there's Cairngorm mountains and stuff. So what tends to happen is I'll always go back to first contact. So ideally, I'll get the person on the phone, and then ideally I'll focus that conversation with them because they may not be wanting to focus. They may be wanting to tell me how badly their day is going, and I need to get as much information as I can about how long they can stick it for and where I think they are before their phone dies or whatever, because you've got to treat every call you get with them as potentially your last call with them. And if I can get that, that helps. So, and we've just got to be fair. The call centres, you know, the kind of 999, etc. The people who are dealing with everything from a cat stuck up a tree through to a mountain rescue in a place that is unpronounceable if you don't speak Gaelic. And I kind of, although I can get grumpy about it, the bottom line is that's the way it is, and they are working to postcodes most of the time. So I having got back to the person, will try and get an idea of where they are. And then what I've got to do is watch myself for being too cocky, because you can suddenly go, aha, I know exactly where you are. And that's a very unwise thing to do, because you can end up going to the wrong place. And, you know, like the several Craigellachs, for example, that would be a good example. And then what you have to do is work back through where they intended to be, you know, kind of where they went in from, where the cars. So you get some good stuff from the police, you know, where's the car and that sort of thing. But usually it's about going back to them. And that's what we would always try and do, and try and get some sense of what the plan was. And the plan, like you were saying about plans, the plan may just be they were going to, you know, that's what we would get. But yeah, the postcode bit doesn't really work for us. You can't get Amazon deliveries on the Cass head wall either.
Okay. Anybody? Any other?
Can I just add that my wife, who's also involved, said the call centre didn't know where the Cairngorms were. So presumably you didn't know which MRT to contact.
Yeah, it kind of
situation, I guess.
Yeah, it depends. Well, again, it depends. Remember I said to you, it depends whether you end up with ambulance control or police control. That's the first thing, because police control will always should know where the which mountain rescue team they're dealing with. And then there's another bit, which is the people who then coordinate the helicopters are based down in Portsmouth way. So you've got to work through with them as well about where you're dealing with. But it just varies. I mean, you know, again, a good example would be me taking a call when I was leaving the summit of Cairngorm, and somebody saying, how fast can you have a team at Craigmeggy? It was like, well, you've just phoned me. And then about sort of like 10 minutes later, while I'm kind of trying to sort things on the phone, but also walking down the hill, they said, right, we now want to know when your team's ready for uplift at Craigmeggy. It's like our team are still in their houses. You know, it's so I think it can be very difficult to get people to understand not just the precise locations, but actually the size of our patch. I mean, in Wales or in England, you would probably have 4 or 5 mountain rescue teams covering this area. But then they would also have 6 or 7 times the volume of what we deal with. You know, it was a bit like, you know, like if you take Loch Arbor guys out, God, this has been streamed, isn't it? I'll have to say it anyway. You know, I couldn't do what the Loch Harbour guys do, for example. They are so busy. You know, well over 100 call-outs every year. But so the volumes we have is different from some of this.
Okay, well, that's been really great. Thank you so much for coming on, giving up the time. The slide you showed of the Fecal Ridge reminded me of when we had this encounter a few months ago, and I said, "Oh, Simon, fancy meeting you here. Would you come and do a talk for us?" And
That's not actually true. He said, "Simon, I'm stuck. Will you rescue me?" Shots fired.
Ooh. Okay, no, but thanks very much for coming along. It's been a really good, interesting and informative evening. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
And just before you all go, just again, another reminder about the donation box just by the door. It would be really good if you could put something in there. And in a fortnight's time, our next speaker is Mitchell Semple, and on a completely different subject. It's about the aristocratic landowners of Scotland. And so we'll have a really good insight into some familiar names and families, but I suspect we'll get a lot of unfamiliar and information. So look forward to that. Very different subject, very different topic. So keep the variety going. Thanks all for coming along tonight, and I hope you enjoyed it. See you again soon. Thank you.